I hope the first week of the Pantry Challenge went well for you. This weekend, I have spent some time trying to prepare for the upcoming week. One of the things that I have found is that the more I can try and do preparation on the weekend, the easier things are during the week. I like to have some different options for breakfasts, and so this week I am making sourdough English muffins. This is my first time giving these a go, and it definitely has been a lot of fun. They're fairly simple to make. I think the hardest part for me was probably the cooking piece, just because it's a little bit tricky to try and tell if they are finished. And while the recipe said to give them 4 minutes on each side, I did find that I needed to give them a little longer in order to thoroughly cook all the way through. This week I haven't had a lot of really exciting recipes to share. I mainly was finishing up with some leftovers and kind of doing some inventory to see what it is that I need to use up first thing. So I've dug to the depths of the freezer and the back of the pantry and have found some items that are either expired, close to expired, or just items that have been kind of hanging out for a while that really do need to be used up first. And that's one of the beautiful things about this pantry challenge, is that we can use this time to really be intentional about what it is that we need to use up and try and come up with maybe some new creative ways that we can use those items, and then reevaluate whether or not we want to add more of those items to our pantry or to the freezer in the future, or if there's something that we just probably aren't going to use all that much. As I was digging through, I found a few things that I definitely need to use up first. When it comes to the freezer, if you happen to see one of my videos a while back, I had some issues with my inside refrigerator and freezer, and I lost some of the food that was in there, and then some of the food was still salvageable, but just because of the nature of the situation, I'm trying to use that up first, even though some of those items might be a little fresher than other things that I have in my freezer. For example, I had some blueberries in my inside freezer, and they were from this past year, and I have a few blueberries left that were from a previous year. But because the freezer had some issues, I just want to go ahead and use those blueberries up first. So I added them to my list. Digging around a bit more in the freezer, I found some packages of ground hamburger that are from the previous purchase of beef, and so I want to go ahead and try and finish that up. I did go ahead and can up some of that hamburger earlier this year, but I have a little bit left that I would like to go ahead and finish up. I also found some pork chops that are a bit older, as well as some frozen butternut squash that I had purchased from a store a while ago. And it's already cubed, which is great, but I'm not sure exactly what I had in mind when I bought it. And so it needs to be used up, and I'm hoping to figure out what to do with that. When it came to pantry items, a few things that I have that I know I want to use for sure. I have found some tuna that is nearing expiration. I have some black beans that are just recently expired. Both of these items I want to go ahead and work through my rotation. I also found a jar of peanut butter that is close to expiration. Would love to kind of work that through the rotation as well. And when it comes to my actual canned items, I have quite a few canned pears that need to be used up, as well as some canned applesauce that is a little bit older that I would like to go ahead and cycle through as well. just because the items are older, that doesn't mean that I'm in a big hurry to get rid of them or that I want to dispose of them in a wasteful way or anything like that. But what I do enjoy about the pantry challenge is that it gives me an opportunity to really intentionally focus on some of those items that have maybe been pushed to the back of the freezer or the back of the pantry, and just make sure that I'm using those first. Then I can go ahead and reevaluate if it's something that I am using on a regular basis and I just need to replenish that rotation, or if it's something that maybe I need to can less of in the future, or is it something that I have maybe purchased thinking it was a good idea, like the frozen butternut squash, but it probably is not something I will purchase again in the future. I would much prefer growing butternut squash, and at the time that I had made the purchase, it was not something that I was growing at my house or had the opportunity to grow at my house. And so it was bought for a reason, but it's no longer something that I need to replenish. I would much rather grow the butternut squash and then store it over the winter, and that's what we have been doing in the past year. I don't know about you, but I can have an idea of what needs to be used, but then when it comes time to try and make out a meal plan, or when I get home and I'm trying to decide what I want to make for dinner, if I haven't already thought that through, it can be kind of challenging to come up with something, and I find myself reverting back to staple items, which is probably why some of these items have ended up at the bottom of the freezer. So what I decided to do to kind of help myself as far as making a plan, I went ahead and listed out some of the items that I want to make sure I rotate through during this pantry challenge. Then what I wanted to do underneath of that was list out some of the potential recipes that I might want to fix. Next to the recipe, if it's not something that I have just kind of put together myself, or something that I've made frequently enough that I don't have to look up the recipe, I went ahead and wrote down which cookbook I found it in, as well as the page number, or if I found it off of a website or a YouTube video, I just wrote that right next to it so that if I decide I'm going to make that item during the week, it's very easy for me to see that I have a recipe I can pull from and exactly where to find that recipe. One reason this is helpful is that I won't have to try and figure out a recipe if I don't want to. And the other reason it's helpful is that I will already know exactly where to find that recipe. And it also gives me an opportunity to potentially try some new things that I might be able to add to my cooking repertoire. Today, I'll show you a brief overview of crock pot Salisbury steak. I found that recipe online and it looked really good. I've made a few modifications to use up some of the ingredients that I already had around the house, and so I'll share that with you as I go through it. But if it turns out well, this is one more recipe that I can add to the collection for the future and will be a great way for me to use up some of my ground beef. So now that I have all of my ideas listed down, I think this will really help me to be able to make a meal plan for the week. I'm trying to meal plan in a way that I have an idea what I'm making, but yet I'm not so tight on it that if I run out of time or have to make some adjustments, I'm going to feel like I'm off for the week. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is just pull 2 or 3 recipes that I want to plan on making during the course of the week, and then try and prepare accordingly. In that preparation, I'm trying to use my inside freezer as more of my working freezer. Just like you might have an extended pantry and then you have your working pantry, I want to try and use the freezer in a very similar way. Being that my refrigerator freezer had gone out and I was starting fresh, it was a great opportunity for me to start setting up this system even before the pantry challenge. So when I'm using my indoor freezer like my working freezer, I'm trying to think through what are some things that I might want to make this week or in the next couple of weeks, and then I'm pulling out those items from the outside freezer, bringing those into the house so that they are readily accessible, and it's not going to be a big deal if I need to take something out to thaw the night before or in the morning. It'll just be super easy. It's already in the house, and that can help save me time. In the past, one of the main problems I've had when it came to using freezer food was that I would often forget to take out my item, and then it wouldn't be thawed in time to cook it for dinner, and this would cause me a lot of difficulty. So the Instant Pot has helped with that a bit, and then also trying this new strategy of using my inside freezer as my working freezer, that has been really helpful as well. I've dabbled with the concept in the past. I would end up bringing some things home, and then I would just end up throwing them into the inside freezer because I didn't want to take them outside. And so just like your working pantry can sometimes get cluttered and bogged down with new stuff that really shouldn't be there yet, I think the inside freezer was kind of ending up that same way. And so, like I said, with a fresh start, it was a great opportunity for me to really tighten up that strategy and see if I could make that work for me a little bit better. The other thing this allows is that if I have leftovers that I'm not going to be able to use during the week, I now have some space inside where I can go ahead and pop those meals into the freezer and have that available to pull out for lunches during the following week or something like that. These are just a couple of tips for how I'm trying to be a little more intentional and organized with my meals from the pantry and freezer. And I hope they'll be helpful for you as well. Sometimes the hardest part of eating from the pantry is really that time factor or that planning factor. And so you do have to plan ahead a little bit. Cooking from scratch or cooking from the pantry is not necessarily a challenging thing in the sense of it's hard, but it can be challenging in the sense that you do have to plan ahead and really think through what it is that you're going to be doing. And sometimes when we're really busy running here or there and doing all these different activities or different things that are a normal part of our everyday life, it can be a challenge to really plan out some of those meals, and then it feels like we're reaching for convenience foods or we're not being as successful as we wanted to when it comes to eating homemade food. If you're getting value from today's video, I would love to have you click like. And if you know someone who could really benefit from hearing the tips that we're sharing today, don't forget to share this video with them as well. So today we're going to make one of those meals that I have listed on my plan, and we're doing the slow cooker Salisbury steak. I did get this recipe from a website, which I will link down below in the description. And then as I'm making the meal, I'll share with you a few of the adjustments that I made based off of what I had on hand and why I made a couple of the decisions that I did as far as what I was using. I started off with 1 onion. I put about 3/4 of the onion sliced to go into the bottom of the crock pot, and then I took the additional 1/4 of the onion and diced that up and added it to the ground beef mixture. The recipe called for 6 ounces of mushrooms, and I think you could use canned mushrooms here. That may have been what they were asking for. I had some fresh mushrooms in the fridge that needed to be used up, and so I went ahead and sliced those up, and then I decided to saute the mushrooms and the onions in a little bit of butter just to give a little bit of flavor and pre-cook them just a little bit before adding them to the bottom of the crock pot. Once the mushrooms and onions were cooked and added to the crock pot, it was time to take care of the beef mixture. I had 2 pounds of ground beef. The recipe called for 1.5 pounds, but I didn't have a plan for the other 1/2 pound, so I went ahead and mixed it all together. To compensate for that, I added the double yolker egg. I wasn't sure that it was going to be a double yolker, but it turned out to be when I added it in. And then, of course, the recipe called for 1 clove of garlic, but I feel like you can never have too much, and so I added 3 or 4 cloves of garlic just to give a little extra seasoning. The recipe called for panko crumbs. I did not have any of those on hand, and so I put in a little bit of stuffing mix just to kind of add a similar texture. And then I went ahead and formed the beef into patties, browned them on both sides for about 3 minutes each. I didn't really check the time exactly, but it's approximately that, just enough to brown everything up, and then the patties were added to the crock pot. For the sauce that was going to go over the patties, it called for 1 ounce of brown gravy mix, which I used, and then 1.5 cups of beef broth. I don't have any actual beef broth on hand, but I do have the dried mixture, which I added into that gravy mix. And then, of course, a few of the other items such as ketchup and Dijon mustard. All of that was mixed together to make a nice gravy that went over the top of these patties. I rounded off the meal with some mashed potatoes and, of course, my favorite, some Brussels sprouts that I just sauteed in a little bit of butter with some onion and garlic. Made for a wonderful meal that I would definitely replicate again. I hope today's video was a help and encouragement to you, and we would love to have you subscribe and be part of our community here at Blooming Wildwood Homestead. I can't wait to see you back here next time. Until then, bye everyone.